It's an obvious lesson, and we, the UK, are right at the centre of this situation. It gets worse, however, and why I wanted to use part of tonight to deal with it, yes, I'm watching the time, is that after I'd done the Herndl and Miller cases, I was then asked to go last year on a mission, a legal mission, independent lawyers, to Palestine to witness and report back on something you may never have heard of, and why should you have? Military courts in Israel, actually in the occupied territories. Now, military courts, guess who set them up in the first place? Great Britain. They are a legacy, and the Israelis are very proud to tell us, the British lawyers, you set them up in the first place. It's military law that rules the majority of Palestinians. And we looked particularly at the age of very young boys, 12, 13, 14. If you throw a stone at the wall, you know the wall, I'll come to that in a moment. The wall which we've seen that sears its way through homes, gardens, olive trees demolished, wells cut off, pipelines destroyed for many meters either side of this wall, never mind the inability to get across, even though one half of your family is on one side and one half on this. So the word apartheid is a very appropriate word. Throwing a stone against the wall, you're not arrested then. In the night, the army arrives in a village. They round up, they don't really know who did it, they round up all the people in the sort of 12, 13, 14 bracket. They put them in the Saracens. They get worked over well and truly before they get to a police station where the police take over. There are 98% confessions, the highest, one of the highest rates in the world. They don't bother with anything else. You wait 4 months in custody, sometimes without any contact with your family, waiting for a hearing. If you choose to fight the case, you wait much longer, twice, and of course you get a higher sentence. What's the sentence that they're handing out? It starts at 4 months, but it works up to 2 years, 3 years. Very interesting, this, bringing it up to date. Maybe you didn't follow. There'd be no reason why you would, because I bring it back to the United Kingdom. What happened in the United Kingdom this time last year, outside the Israeli embassy in London? People demonstrated with real passion against what had happened in Gaza this time last year. They were arrested. About 118 people were arrested, 70 were charged. How many of those 70, despite a very multicultural protest, mixed people there? Of the 70, 68 were Muslim. And what are the sentences that are being handed out for throwing a bottle or a stone? Outrageous. For people with no previous convictions, who are wanting to really make a statement, and maybe they overstep the mark. They range from, again, interestingly, exactly what the Israelis are handing out, 4 months up to 2 years. That is why another reason, it's just another brick in this wall. You see that the kind of justice when it comes to Palestine is left behind. The report is being written in relation to lots of other things that we looked at in relation to the military courts, the wall, the settlements, the destruction of the settlements. Well, that's happening now. What about the arrogance of a state that not only commits state terrorism, I'm afraid, I've given you the example, plenty more like that, but actually says when Joe Biden arrives, we're going to build more settlements because they do not care anymore, in a sense, even about America, except they're perhaps twinging a bit because it's upsetting the American generals because it's putting American troops at risk. Oh, I see. So maybe attitudes will soften a bit, but I doubt it. Netanyahu's gone there indicating more settlements are on the way. There's an article in the press today indicating a hotel development in East Jerusalem. Because let's just pause for a minute. This is not a rant about something that is, you know, the right of the Israelis. I'm afraid it is not. It has been declared illegal time and time again by UN resolution after UN resolution, and including the World Court. The settlements are illegal, the occupation is illegal, the military courts are illegal. There's nothing that's legal. This is an illegal state in a sense. It's almost, and I'm sorry to use strong language, it's almost a pariah, and we should be doing something about this. Now, I've brought with me, just in case somebody thinks it's just me making all this up, I've brought the judgment of the World Court. You should read this judgment, the International Court of Justice at The Hague, 2004. 15 judges, drawn from all over the world, were asked to consider the legality of the wall. So this wasn't just any old pundit. This wasn't just any old person on the street, and of course their views are just as important, but this was a specialist court. By 14 votes, first of all, Israel was trying to deny jurisdiction, or so they went through all sorts of things to try and stop the court, as it were, considering it. But the court took a very courageous stand, and they said, no, no, we're going to consider it. And furthermore, they come to very clear decisions by 14 votes to 1. Well, you can guess who the 1 was. 14 votes. Firstly, they re-emphasize the illegality of what Israel has been doing to the Palestinians in the occupied territories, and of course that includes Gaza now, but it did include Gaza then. And they spell out very clearly that it's a breach of international law on the humanitarian law basis, in relation to Geneva Conventions and so on, and also on the human rights level in terms of covenants to do with civil and political rights. Because what they actually are saying is that the Palestinians have been denied the right of self-determination. Now you could sit there saying, well, what's this got to do with me? Absolutely everything, because it's to do with the rule of law. And what the court said, in very clear terms, I'm not going to read it out now, there's not time to read it out, but I have it here. The court said, you out there, you nations of Europe, you the UN, you have an obligation under international law to stop what's going on in Israel, to stop the settlements, to take the wall down, etc. And it made it very clear the obligation was not one that you could get out of. It was a legal obligation. Once you've signed up to the various treaties, you have an obligation, just as you have an obligation, in a sense, to prevent crime on a sort of local level. But has anything happened? No. The United Nations pass a resolution, but they don't do anything. They're pretty fast off the mark if it's Kuwait, Iraq, or anywhere else in the world, but no, they don't seem to want to put something together when it comes to Israel. And what happened this year, which is why, again, I'm consumed with this topic for the moment, is I sit on something called the Russell Tribunal, set up originally by Bertrand Russell, a peace foundation with certain initiatives. Some of you in the audience may remember in the 70s, the first one considered Vietnam and the war crimes committed by the American government, and helped bring pressure on the American government to back off. The second Russell Tribunal dealt with war crimes, as well as, much more particularly, oppression in South America by military dictatorships. This one that I've just been on is the third one, and it's looking at Israel-Palestine. But instead of spending a lot of time listing all the violations by Israel, which are really very obvious, but one needs to be reminded how serious it is, it moved into the arena of saying, well, let's have a look at what Europe, as a treaty member, as a party in a sense, what has it done?